Well, hi, everyone. I am your host, Mike Hingson, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. And today we get to talk with Abby Havermann. Abby is, I find, a very interesting person. She teaches mission driven, purpose oriented insight executives to unlearn. And we won't go into the unlearning because Abby's going to talk to us about that. And so I don't want to give anything away. I've read her bio, so I know. But at the same time, what I want to do is to let her do that. So, Abby, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Thanks so much. I love your podcast, so I'm happy to be here as well.
Well, we love it too, and we appreciate the fact that you do. Well, why don't we start, as I love to do, by you telling us maybe something about the early Abby growing up and all that. And I know that we were comparing notes and you grew up in Boston. Love to hear about that. And Steve's ice cream parlor and all the other wonderful things about Boston. But anyway, and I guess one of my favorite places in Boston, Durgan Park, closed during the pandemic.
Yeah. I know it's terrible. I'm not familiar with Durgan Park because I
It
grew
was
up
in Quincy Market,
in
and
Quincy Market. Okay, yeah, for
yeah,
sure. The Chip Yard in Quincy Market is my favorite. Did you go
yeah.
there?
No,
Oh
I
my God.
didn't go there, but I went to Durgan Park several times, and I hear that they closed. But
Oh,
sad,
yeah, no.
sad.
We did
Well,
go to Steve's
anyway,
Creamery, but
well, tell us about the early Abbey.
yeah, so I mean, I grew up in, like you said, outside of Boston, and I think just from a young age, I kind of came out pretty scrappy. And I had a big personality. I always seemed to have something to say, and it wasn't always in favor of what people wanted to hear. I felt like I noticed things. I kind of always wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, and that didn't really go over that well. But I had, a close, extended family, and spent lots of times with my grandparents and my cousins and my parents and siblings. And I mean, I don't think it was that unusual of a childhood, so to speak. But Boston is bone chilling cold. If you've lived there, you know that. And so I wanted to get out as quickly as I could. And so after high school, I hightailed it out, um, and moved actually across the country to spend a year at University of Southern California.
Ah,
Yeah, yeah, but that was such a culture shock, being on the West Coast from the East Coast, that I just went right back. I went back to the East Coast until later I moved to Colorado. And yeah, that's where I spent about 30 years.
well, Colorado has its share of cold, I would point out.
Not bone chilling cold.
Not bone chilling cold, you're right.
No, with the
But
dry air, it's a totally different cold.
but the culture shock of being at Fight on USC was greater of an issue than the bone chilling cold of being on the East Coast, huh?
It was. I mean, I just, on the East Coast, people like they're harder to get to know, but they say it like it is. They're very direct, and
Yeah.
when I went to California, I felt like it was so hard to get to know people. You just couldn't get very deep, or at least that's how I felt. Plus, I didn't realize how sheltered I had been. And it was a very big school and in the middle of Watts, and
Yeah.
it was a culture shock for sure. And I wasn't a Pac-10 athlete, and I wasn't, in sororities and all the things that, are, very popular in that particular area. So it just it and I was so insecure at that time in my life that I think I could not have broken into either of those, even if I had wanted to. I
Hmm.
just was in my own way constantly. So I pretty much just came running back and flew out a white flag of defeat in terms of individuating. And
Did you go back to Boston?
I actually went to Wheaton College, yep, outside of
Okay.
Boston.
All
Hmm.
right. Now, what did you major in at USC, and did you follow through on that when you went back to Wheaton?
Well, back to my confidence issue. When I went to USC, I actually declared a drama major. That's what I really wanted to declare. And I never took a single drama class because I did not have the confidence. And
Ah,
so when I went to Wheaton, I majored in social psychology, which was something that just came very easily to me and I enjoyed. And that's what I did.
ah. So social psychology. and you got a bachelor's. Did you go beyond that?
Yeah, I ended up getting a master's in social work at Smith College School for Social
Okay.
Work. And that's when after that, I worked in several hospitals as an inpatient psychiatric social worker in Denver. And then shortly after that, I opened my own private practice, and I had that for a little over a decade. And that's then I closed my practice and ended up going into business with my second husband as a financial advisor because he had a financial firm, and I worked in his office with him for 12 years.
Wow.
And that's when I realized I want to talk to people, but not about money. And I had to go back to my roots. And so, not as a psychotherapist, but that's when I went back to as a teacher of unlearning and coaching, and having learned some about, neuroscience and ancient wisdom practices and things like that, that greatly informed the psychology teaching.
Now, when you say ancient wisdom practices, tell me a little about that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there, and whether it's, the Dhamma and the teachings of Buddha, or whether it's I do a lot of work with a Gurdjieff teacher. He's a mystic from the early 1900s, and it weaves together. The more I learn about all these different things, the more everything seems to be coming back to the same thing. And science now is sort of uncovering things that they've known for so long, for thousands of years, whatever the practice is, yogic science, Buddhism, all of those kinds of things. Everywhere I turn, it all comes back to this. I mean, it comes back to so much, but this innate power that's in us to change.
Yeah.
This innate wisdom that we have, and this, the more I, think about it and learn about it and study with people about it, we have gotten so smart over time, but we've really not gotten any wiser.
Yeah.
And that's why I like going back and looking at some of those practices.
I was watching a news broadcast this morning, and one of the things that they mentioned was that there has been a study that says that at least 1 in 4 people wake up every day and have a bad day, and they know they're going to have a bad day because they wake up with a headache or whatever, and they know they can't change having a bad day, which is bizarre to me. Um,
Yeah.
I reject that concept. I think, as you are pointing out, that we do have control over that, but we have so many people, as I would put it, that don't listen to their inner voice. You can say listen to God or whatever, but the bottom line is we don't listen, and of course we have a bad day because we don't listen to the answers that are right there in front of us.
Yeah, and we've been taught not to, right? We've literally been conditioned, from, the industrial age, and all the learnings that we had, with Newtonian physics and all that stuff, to just never, to always look at our outside circumstances. And what you're saying is so true. Like, the innate wisdom is in us, and it's the last place that we ever look.
Yeah,
Uh, and to your point, it's unbelievable. We are taught to think it's like, oh, something happens, we have an emotional reaction to it, and it's like, oh, now I'm just stuck with these emotions, nothing I can
yeah,
do. Now I'm
yeah.
just here with this. And that's the bit, right? Like, that's the dream that people like you and I have, to like help people understand that no, 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 you have the power to change your brain and body. You don't have to live by that.
How do we get people to understand that? I mean, obviously that's part of what you do. So, how do you get people to unlearn that kind of, I won't even say it's a concept because it's not, it's just a bad message, but how do people unlearn that?
Well, yeah, I mean, first we have to understand, like, that we came upon it honestly, right? Like, that we're really in fight or flight so much of the time, that the way we've evolved was for survival. And if you're going to evolve for survival, you're going to be looking into your environment to find out, what you need to do to keep yourself safe. So our brains are wired to look outside ourselves and say, "Oh, this is the problem. I need to fix that, and if I fix that, I can be safe." And so we're very rarely looking inside ourselves. And in fact, when you're under stress, you physiologically can't look inside yourself because you're in a state of where you're like,
Hmm.
run, fight, or hide. Where do I need to go? how do I need to keep myself safe? You're not looking in yourself and being like, oh, let me ponder, how to evolve myself today, right? So part of it is teaching people literally how to physiologically shift to um, uh, open up the centers of the brain that are more aligned with curiosity and community and the empathy circuitry and all of the things where that wisdom, we can really plug into the wisdom that's in your heart, right? Helping people understand that we store emotions in our bodies, and those thoughts and emotions that we're firing are creating our actions unconsciously. And it's not hard to get someone to understand it as soon as you start talking to them, right? Because you
Right.
can give so many examples and they're like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. When this happened, then I automatically and unconsciously, had this thought and feeling, and then I acted this way. And before I knew it, the whatever, there was an argument with my coworker, or the team meeting blew up, or whatever happened. And as soon as they begin to get curious about how their own behavior, their own thoughts and emotions can impact the people around them, um, that's empowering, right? That's when you realize you really do have power. It's not, I'm going to empower you to be able to have a voice. No, it's being empowered inside of yourself to recognize the power that's already inherently there.
I love something you said, though, which is that this is what we're taught. And I think that that's exactly right. I don't think we're born that way necessarily, but that is what we're taught.
Yeah. No, we are. And not only that, we're encouraged to, right? I mean, like I read somewhere, I don't know if it was maybe in the book Letting Go, I can't remember, but how Freud's was really misunderstood when he talked about expression versus repression. That the idea wasn't intended to be that if you just say your emotions out loud, you will release them. And this is what we've kind of been taught from ancient, like back in the psychology and even in psychology in school for, that degree. It's sort of like all we need to do is just express what's going on. So now we're complaining to each other where, and everybody's going, oh, you're right. You have a right to feel this way. Yes, this is terrible. This is terrible. And yes, we do have a right to feel this way. I mean, right, better than anybody. I have one of the reasons I was so attracted to your podcast is that I have a child who has a disability. And, you know, uh, there's lots and lots of reasons to feel bummed out or upset or limited, right? That's not the question. The question is, do you really wanna?
That's right. The
Right?
reality is you may have the right to do it because you have the right to make choices. But on the other hand, is that really the best choice? And the answer is not really.
Yeah. And not because you're a better person if you don't, not
Hmm.
because you get kudos, but because your life is better. Because
Right.
you get to determine how, whether you're happy or sad or resentful or, or holding a grudge,
Yeah, I agree, and I see it so often. I remember so many times I'm asked, "Well, you were in the World Trade Center and you escaped. Did you go through a lot of therapy? Because you seem like you're pretty normal now, whatever that means." And I point out, no, I didn't go through counseling directly, but what I did, and it was a little bit unconscious. At least I didn't think about this as a reason for doing it, but my wife and I agreed that talking about the World Trade Center attacks and allowing people to hire me to come and do speeches and talk about the lessons we should learn made me pretty visible. And a lot of reporters wanted to do interviews. And the reality is that my therapy ended up being the media coming into our home, literally hundreds of interviews asking every question from the most inane to the most insightful you can imagine. But that made me talk about it. And that's, I think, the biggest key is being able to talk about it and recognizing as you do that you're thinking about it. And that causes your brain to help you be able to put it all in perspective, whatever that may be and whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think, what you're talking about is so important because I think we get mixed up so easily between what is the difference between acknowledging what happened to you and dwelling in what happened to you? And it is so important to be able to talk about it and acknowledge like the feelings that you have.
Sure.
Cannot deny those. If we just think, well, I should, in quotes, be able to, be in a great mood, even though I feel like crap or whatever. And you just keep trying that, it's not going to work. You have to acknowledge what is. You have to be truthful about what is, but understanding that you have the power to overcome, and all of that resides inside of you. And it may take, depending on whatever happened, maybe you're over it in 30 seconds. 9/11 going to take a lot longer, right? Like you have the patience to walk through that with yourself. But understanding that it's not what happens to us in our lives that's important. It's how we react to it
Right.
and what we make of it. And look at what you've made of that, right? Like what a phenomenal story, what a horrific, accident, and not even accident, horrific event. And look at how many people you've touched as a result, and how many people you've taught, and how many lives you've changed.
Well, and one of the things I realized at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've talked about it some here on the podcast, is that while I won't say I wasn't afraid on September 11th, I had learned to control fear because I prepared for the eventuality that there could be an emergency. And there had been a bombing in the World Trade Center in 1993 in the parking lot. It didn't do a lot of damage, but nevertheless, it caused a lot of people to move out of the World Trade Center. So I came along at a time when I was hired to open an office. And in opening the office, we got a great rent, got a great price for it, and we moved in. And I immediately started spending a good amount of time learning all I could about the complex, including what all the emergency and evacuation procedures were, emergency preparedness, what to do, where the emergency exits were, and how to get anywhere I needed to go, not just one way, but every possible way
Mm.
to get around. And that was something that, as I mentioned before about physics and paying attention to details, that's the whole point of it. But what all of that did was actually, although I never thought about it for many years afterward, but what that really did was created in me a mindset that you know what to do. Well, an emergency happened, and I was able to let that mindset take over. And as I describe it to people, allowed my fear to be a guide and a device that helped me stay motivated and focused rather than the fear overwhelming, or as I put it, blinding me to what was going on so I couldn't make a decision. And I believe that we do have that capability. We don't need to allow fear to overwhelm us and to make life impossible. And yeah, I understand there's a natural reaction, and people have physical reactions when they're afraid and so on. But the reality is, from a mind standpoint, you do have the ability to control that. And so you do have the ability to take that fear and make it a positive thing and not a negative thing that overwhelms you because you suddenly totally just feel helpless.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. I mean, I guess one of the things is that, when I think about it, it's like obviously that's such a fearful situation, but I often think about the degree to which people are in fear just on a daily basis. When you talk to business owners and the fear that, realistic or not, that financial ruin's going to happen.
Yeah.
The fear of, what am I going to look like when I get up on stage and give this presentation? The fear that, you're not going to be able to, make the quota. The fear that your boss is going to be upset. All of these things, or, the fear of what's going to happen with your children, all of this futuristic thinking, like literally, if you think about it, I feel like we are in fear so much of the time, and it's just an unconscious process at this point. And to your point about, it's not just your mind, right? Like, because the mind can't really get us out of fear. The mind just sort of chatters to itself, and the fear is stored in your body. And so, really having an understanding of how the mind and the body work together is so important to be able to overcome those emotions, because emotions are stored in your body. We can talk to, I mean, how many times have you talked to people that are talking themselves, trying to talk themselves out of feeling a certain way? You cannot talk yourself out of feeling something. It won't work. And then you'll just end up feeling, deflated because you couldn't do it. It's really a combination of understanding with your mind what needs to happen with your body as well.
Well, what you have to do is to learn how to step back and say, what is it that is really a problem for me right now? What am I really afraid of? And should I be afraid of it? One of the things that I have talked about a fair amount regarding September 11th is that I realized that there are a lot of things over which we don't have control. And if we, as we usually tend to do, what if the world to death and worry about everything in the world that goes on rather than focusing on the things over which we really do have control, we're going to have more and more fear. We're going to just drive ourselves crazy, and we're going to continue to do what we've always done. But the reality is, and I think a lot does have to do with the mind, but it is also communicating with the body. It's a mind body process. But the ultimate issue is that we have to decide and learn how to take that control and focus just on the things that we really have influence over and not worry about the rest of it. So one of the things that I did when the pandemic started was to begin writing a book called, as it turns out, Live Like a Guide Dog: True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith. And the idea behind the book is to teach people how to control fear. And I use examples of lessons that I have learned from working with 8 guide dogs and my wife's service dog, the
Mhm.
lessons that I learned from them that when we apply them will help us really deal with fear in the right way. So it's all about learning to control that fear. And, as an example, what if, as I said, um, we what if everything to death, and most of the time we don't have any control over it, and it isn't going to happen anyway, but we spend so much time worrying about it that we don't focus on the what ifs or the issues that are directly really relevant to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that what if question, that analytic brain is really what separates us from dogs and animals, right? We have the ability to get stuck in this analysis paralysis. And we've been sort of taught like hanging out in that left brain is really, it's the more important place to be. And if we just keep going around and chewing on something, we'll get an answer, to your point, all the way back to the beginning of what you said, without looking inside ourselves at all, which doesn't require really any thought. It's more sensory oriented. um, what needs to be done here? And it's really, I find, what I've learned throughout the years and what I teach is that, and practice, is that it's when you settle your nervous system down, when you stop, feeding into a dysregulated nervous system, that those options are available to you. Um, and you're able to kind of stop the fear and just observe rather than analyze what's going on.
Well, and we really can do that. One of the things that I talk about in Live Like a Guide Dog, which was published in August of 2024, is that if we would take time at the end of every day to step back as we're falling asleep, even when it's quiet, and look at what happened today, what worked, what didn't work. And I reject the concept that anything is a failure. It's a learning experience, and
Mhm.
good things that happen to us are learning experiences. How could I have done that better than I did? What else could I have done? But in the case of things that are a problem that we tend to dwell on, why is it a problem? What was I afraid of? How do I deal with that? And really taking the time to start to deal with answering those kinds of questions and doing it regularly and practicing it is what is going to start to allow us to be able to use our minds to communicate with the rest of us and move forward in a much more positive way. And maybe tomorrow not wake up with a bad day.
Right. And like you say, being able to do that from an objective standpoint, so much of what I see is that people just beat the hell out of themselves.
Yep.
So that simple exercise of, what do I love about what I did and what would I do differently becomes a session of self-flagellation of like, oh, I'm so terrible and I did this and that wrong and blah 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 blah. Or the opposite, where it's like I didn't do anything wrong and we completely dissociate from the parts of ourselves that are showing up that aren't useful in a situation. And when you can teach people to sort of have more of that objective focus because they have, they've built a part inside themselves that can be loving and empathic toward themselves and others, that they can stop and say, all right, well, let's see, what do I love about what I did?
Yeah.
And what do I need to do differently next time to make it go differently? It's not about you're a horrible person or you're a great person.
Right.
It has nothing to do with that.
Right. And the issue is when you talk about what did I do wrong, um, you didn't think it was wrong until it didn't go the way you wanted. And so it doesn't mean that you intentionally made a mistake or anything like that. So you got to be able to step back and say, so what really happened here? What do I learn from it? Um, I've learned that one of the most important things I can say is not that I'm my own worst critic, but rather I'm my own best teacher, which is much more positive anyway. But
Mm.
the fact of the matter is that we worry about so many things so much that Mark Twain and other people who have made comments about fear point out that most everything we're afraid of or fear will never come to pass. And we just spend way too much time worrying about it and it drives us crazy.
Well, yeah, and what you were just saying, I mean, one of the things that I bring to teams and organizations, one of the modalities that I use is positive intelligence, which was created by Shirzad Chamine, and he talks about the sage perspective, which is everything can be turned into a gift and opportunity, right? And when you're looking at it from that standpoint, if everything can be turned into a gift and opportunity, there is no failure. There is nothing
Right.
to beat yourself up about. It's just a curiosity of like, okay, what's the gift here? And it's very hard, I think, when people are under intense stress in business and dysregulated and dealing with all kinds of things, to be able to stop and think there might be a gift in losing this client, or there might be a gift in having to do these layoffs. But there always is. There always is.
Well, and the other part about it is when you talk about stress, how much of the stress, if you will, that we feel is induced by us
Yeah.
because we don't learn to step back and look at it in a little bit more of an objective way.
Well, it's reinforced by us, right? Like we are firing the same thoughts and we're firing the same emotions and we're doing that over and over and over again, and we're dumping more and more cortisol in our bodies.
Right. And we're not learning a thing.
And
Or
we're not learning a thing.
it's there to learn, but we're not learning it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and people are becoming more and more divided. But the great news is that, it doesn't have to be that way, right? It
Right.
doesn't have to be that way. And that's, why I think, the message that you put out there is so very, very important.
Well, I think it is. And I think that we can learn that we can progress in a much more positive way. And we may discover along the way that we end up doing some of the same things that we did, but for different reasons. And maybe they really weren't such bad things anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have clients who have had to, lay off people, and when you're a business owner, you're laying off people, it feels like the worst thing in the world. You feel like
I know. I've done it.
you're, yeah, right. I mean, people they feel like they failed, they feel guilty, they feel worried about the rest of their employees. And when you start to really unpack it, um, the truth of the matter becomes something else. First of all, if you are having to go through a layoff or something, you're typically anything that you do that you're doing right now, next year you're going to be doing you're going to be playing on a bigger stage. So if you're laying off and your business is this size, next year you're going to avoid whatever the problem was that caused you to have to do that when you're playing with a bigger stage, when there's more
Yeah.
money on the line, right?
Yeah.
That there's when you can approach the world and understanding that your failures are your lessons, and sometimes God does for us what we can't do for ourselves, you know, it makes life a lot easier to get through. We don't end up holding on to the same things, and we learn, like you're saying, faster instead of continuing to do the same thing over and over again and making the same mistakes over and over again.
Life gives us the opportunity to really live an adventure and grow if we choose to do it. Unfortunately, all too often people just won't do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always say, like, not every soul is here to evolve. Not every
Yeah.
soul is here to do the same thing, and we need everybody here, right? But there's a collective conscious, right? And um, some people are here to evolve to a certain place. Some people are here to go beyond. Some people are here to just do it all over again.
Yeah. Well, but those people who do it all over again, hopefully eventually get to the point where they can evolve. And that's part of the issue, of course, is when are you going to decide to do that?
Well, and it's never ending, right? It's like there is no evolved. It's we're evolving, right? Like I like to think that I'm overcoming things in this lifetime that I won't have to come back and do in another, but I'm sure there are things that I'm not, like so it's a never-ending process. But I think we're taught, that we're not taught that. We're not taught that,
No,
life is a playground,
no, we're not. We're constantly taught that life is hard and so many other things rather than life is an adventure. We can have fun. We ought to have fun. And yeah, there are times to be serious, but still you can do that in a positive way.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Maybe Mark Twain was right. I wonder if God invented man because he was disappointed in the monkeys, but we won't go there.
Well, I feel like that now. Like, somebody's looking down on us and going, "Oh, you guys haven't learned anything yet? Let me throw some more things for you to get
Yeah.
really upset and divided about, and see if you can learn now." And
Yeah.
keep kind of proving over and over again that we're not going to learn. We need to keep experiencing all of these things.
Well, but he's probably pleased when somebody does learn. And so that's good too.
Right, right. Because it's a collective, right?
Yeah.
So the more people that begin to start to look inward instead of outward and begin to see that, they have that power inside themselves. I always say, like, I always wonder, what would it be like, if instead of, focusing on these external things, we were all always focused internally. So something upsets me, and instead of saying you upset me or this thing upset me, I immediately go inward and say, isn't this curious that this upset me so much? I wonder what that's about. And
Yeah.
if I'm taking care of all of that inside of me and you're taking care of all of it that's going on inside of you, well, there's really nothing to argue about.
Yeah.
And you have more control over your life because you don't have control over what other people do. You can ask them to do things differently. You can say you're upset about it. You can try and manipulate your life so you don't have to deal with things. But at the end of the day, you ultimately don't have control over it. It might work 50% of the time, maybe if you're lucky. The only thing you have complete control over is how you react to something.
Right.
And
And
that's going to determine next steps.
that's what we need to learn to do is to do a better job of truly reacting whatever that may mean in any given situation rather than doing knee-jerk reactions to something and not necessarily doing a very positive or helpful thing. But the reality is we can learn to listen to that voice inside of us that is there to tell us how to react if we choose to use it and listen to it.
And I would say not even react, but respond, right? When you
Right.
think about the word responsibility, it's the ability to respond. Reacting is what I'm doing when my nervous system is already dysregulated.
Right.
Responding, is something we can train ourselves to be able to do,
Right.
to stop. And it doesn't happen overnight. And there's different things that happen that are going to trigger you more than other things.
Right. So when did you start teaching and doing what you're doing now?
Well, I after I left the financial advising, and during that time, I began to really learn a lot about neuroscience and study under some mentors, and that's when I really realized, like, oh, this was sort of the missing link for me as a psychotherapist. This is like it reaffirmed some things that I kind of intuitively knew, and so began to start doing it in one-on-one coaching and teaching in that sense, and then eventually, doing groups and working with teams and things like that since then. So and just kind of bringing all of the modalities that I use together to help people get unstuck, help teams get unstuck, so that you know it's possible to work in ease and flow. And we've all had those times, I hope, where you have a day where you're just running around with your hairs on fire,
Hmm.
and you're going from one thing to the next, versus also you have a day where it's like, gosh, everything just went smoothly and I didn't worry about time and I got ended up getting more done than I ever thought I could. Like, we have control over what kind of day we're going to have. And so um, it becomes so important, because when we can go into our work or our office or our meetings with our clients, instead of being hijacked by all these thoughts of like, oh, am I prepared? What are they going to think? Oh my God, da, 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 all of these things. Instead of going in from, in a place where you're grounded and what I
Right.
call inside out instead of outside in, like worrying about what do they need instead of what am I here to be of service with? Um, it makes everything flow. And I think we need more people in flow and less people in stress and anxiety. So that's kind of when I really started to do it, because I can tell you in the financial services industry, there's a lot of people in stress and anxiety.
Yeah. Well, having sold on Wall Street for many years and watching traders and
Oh
and
yeah.
all the things that go on. Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. What did your husband think when you decided to leave the financial industry and go back into more of what you're doing now?
Well, I don't think he was thrilled because it left him with a lot of extra work. But we had actually transitioned at one point. I mean, I was thinking, God, what do I need to do? Like, something's missing. I thought maybe I needed a hobby. So I started to, I joined a choir and I started writing and I started doing all these things. And that's when I kind of realized it's not that I need a hobby, it's that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had even, started working with women, and I had been running women's seminars, which were really fun. And he had sort of done more of like more of the back end stuff, and I was able to talk to women and all of those things. But even that wasn't enough. Um, and so, on the one hand, he wasn't thrilled, and on another, he totally understood that I'm here to do something different, and I really believe that you have to do what makes your heart sing in this
Yeah.
lifetime. So it was a transition, but he's my husband's a rock. I'm very lucky. He's always right there backing me up. So I was lucky.
And he's coping with it well these days, I assume.
He is. Oh yeah. Now, yeah, and what we built together, he's able to have the business and the life that he loves as well. I mean, he was doing it long before me,
Yeah.
and we'll do it long after.
So how long ago was it that you left the financial environment and started what you're doing now?
That was in 2018.
Okay.
So
So
I started in psychotherapy in 97, and
right.
then I started in the financial industry in 2007-ish, and then left in 2018.
Well, but I bet if you really think about it, and probably you have, you could point out things that you learned during your time in the financial world that help you today.
Oh, of course. I
See?
mean, yeah, I mean, right. There was no mistake, right? And um, there was lots of gifts that came out of that for me, right? Not, not to mention that I really understand the unique pressures of that industry and what people are dealing with. And that informs the work that I do now. But also, even just the self discovery of like, wow, I didn't need a hobby. I wasn't listening to myself. I was out of alignment,
Yeah.
you know? And that's okay too, because you know what? Doing something for the family, doing something for the people that I worked with, and being of service in that way was also a gift. So no regrets for sure.
No, and I think that's really the issue. You're comfortable with what you're doing, and so you shouldn't have to have regrets. And again, you learned a lot, and you recognize that, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think having a perspective in life that everything is truly happening as it should, is is important, and if nothing else, really helps you get through a lot easier, right? Because lots of people find themselves in situations, whether it's a divorce, which I had that too, or things happen that people will beat themselves up about and just feel terrible. Oh, how could I do that? And why did this happen? And all of these things, and it you don't have to have an answer to that. It just did happen,
Yeah,
right? So, and what is the opportunity for you in moving through that?
yeah. Well, I've never experienced divorce directly. My brother went through one, um, and I'm not under the circumstances. We weren't too surprised, but he was where he was, and all that. But my wife and I were married for 40 years, and as I mentioned, she passed away, and so now, um, as I tell people, I have to be a good kid because I know that somewhere she's monitoring, and if I misbehave, I'm going to hear about it. It's as simple as that.
And
I'm
do you hear from her? Do you?
Oh, I hear from her, but I haven't heard anything negative, so I guess I'm behaving.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's here, she's monitoring,
Yeah.
and that's perfectly fine.
I always love to hear stories of that, particularly for people who've been married a long time, like what ways their person shows up, how they're here. Because so many people, when I grew up, my grandmother used to say, dead is dead. And it was absolutely terrifying to
Yeah.
believe like that was the end, And so I love hearing people talk about, where they where they feel their where they feel their loved one, how they know that they're there.
About 6 months after she passed, I remember waking up in the middle of the night because someone or something had taken a hold of my hand,
Oh,
as an
wow.
example, and it
Yeah.
wasn't the cat. And as soon as I woke up, then it was gone, but I know it was there. So, yeah, she's monitoring. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. Now, along the way, you delivered a TED Talk. How long ago was that?
Oh, that was in 2022.
Okay, so the pandemic had started to lift and all that. What, if you would tell me about the TED Talk and what that was all about, and so on.
Yeah, well, the TED Talk really came about. It's something I think I've wanted to do for a long time, but it came about actually as a result of my divorce, and what I went through during that time. And that was really when I had this kind of come to Jesus, that I realized that the things that had happened in my life that I was not in favor of were directly related to a self betrayal. In other words, it wasn't anyone else's fault that these things happened to me or that I went through them. It was that I consistently, as we said in the beginning, did not go inside, did not listen to my inner voice, betrayed myself in any number of ways by, deferring to what other people thought, or making decisions because I didn't think I was worthy of something else, or whatever it was. And it was like, wow, it hit me in the face. It was sort of like there was nowhere else for me to go but jail. Like literally, I was already in prison because I was not listening to myself at all. And so I had that experience, and then years later, I actually was at an assembly for my son, who was like 10 years later, was then in middle school, and they were doing an assembly on sexting for middle school kids
Mm,
because there was this epidemic of kids sexting. And at the time in Colorado, that was a class 3 felony, and there was really nothing they could do to get it off somebody's record. So they were doing an internet safety, and I was listening to the cop up there talking about what was happening. And he said something that, just really shook me, which was that, he would ask the boys, why do you make them send, why do you pressure these girls into sending pictures? And the boys would say, well, because I wanted to see a picture of her naked. And then they would ask the girls, why are you sending it? And the girls would always say, and I knew exactly what he was going to say, they said, because I wanted him to love me. And it really brought me back to all the self betrayals I had had as a young woman. And and I thought, my God, nothing has changed. I mean, that was in 2003, right? I was born in 1970. So I just thought, wow, we are still doing the same thing over and over again. And and it really spurred me to want to tell that story and spread this word that we have the ability to get out of our own ways, that we don't need new legislation. And not that it's not great, and not that we shouldn't have it, but we don't need other people to empower us. We need to empower ourselves. And so that was kind of what my TED Talk was about.
So the title of your talk was Women's Liberation is an Inside Job. Interesting title.
Yeah, well, and that's literally the truth, right? Like, if you think of like the biggest extremes of this, of course, are people like Viktor Frankl, who, talks about how he was in the concentration camps and, man's search for meaning, how he was liberated even in the most, horrific circumstances. And I really believe that liberation is an inside job for all of us, that it's not just for women, but for everyone. It's, to me, doing a TED Talk was great. It was a bucket list thing. I'm so happy I did it. But what makes me feel the most proud of myself is when I overcome some part of myself. That is what makes me feel liberated. When something goes wrong in my external world and my inner world doesn't go crazy, I'm like, oh my God, that is freedom. When something happens in my external world and I lose it or I go into a funk, that's prison to me. Liberation is being able to be in ease and flow no matter what is happening in our outer world, and no matter who is irritating us or what life circumstance has plopped in my lap.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I mean that. Yeah.
Well, and I gather that the talk went well and was well received, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they forced some edits on it, which I understand in hindsight. I wish I had known, but I would could have told the story differently. But no, it was very well received, and I often hear from people who tell me that they shared it widely and
Ah,
it was impactful. So, but if you if you impact just one other person,
it's
like
worth it.
it's worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth it. So it didn't go viral, it wasn't as big as, many TED Talks are, but that's okay. People came up to me afterward and said, I'm the person you needed to talk to. And I was like, all right, then my job's done.
Yeah. You did well, or as I like to say, you done good. And
You done good. Yeah.
and that's what's important. You talk about the dark night of the soul. What is that?
Well, the dark night of the soul is, that come to Jesus moment. And I always say, when I write in my newsletters, I often write about, come to Jesus moments and dark nights of soul. And I always say, if you haven't had one of these, then you're probably not for me because, or I'm probably not for you is really how that is, because it's the dark night of the soul is when you really come face to face with yourself, and you can no longer blame other people. You can no longer not change. You realize that something's happening and it's requiring you to be a different person,
Yeah.
and you see something in yourself that maybe you don't like, or you see something that you realize you can't have. It's not going to work. It's not going to be the way you keep trying to make it be. And you have to come up against yourself and make some really hard decisions and some hard choices and see things in yourself that maybe you don't want to see, you don't want to know about. You'd rather think about yourself in a different way.
Yeah.
The dark night. Have you had one?
Um, I'm not thinking of one right off, but I am sure I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that we all have. Yeah, actually, I can think of some where um, I was behaving in particular ways, and sometimes it's I learn about it because somebody comes along and said, "You're a dirtbag," or "You misbehaved," or "The way you're treating people," and I've had to think about that. But I
Yeah.
think for me, although I didn't notice it until somebody mentioned it, when it occurs and somebody says something, my immediate reaction is to think about that and to internalize it and to go back and look at, well, what is the issue? And sometimes I have realized that it wasn't me and somebody's being manipulative, but sometimes it is me. And it is important to be able to get introspective and think about what is occurring and look at what's going on and what part of it is you and what part of it is not you.
Yeah. And I think it's, I mean, it's so impossible to really truly know ourselves and have a really accurate picture of ourselves. We all have a picture of ourselves, but it's never really accurate because of the way our brains are wired. And so continuing to be open and curious, um, like that, I think is so important. And you come to your own truth, right? But I think truth is so important, to be truthful to yourself,
Yeah.
whether you're throwing yourself under the bus, that's not truthful. Whether you're saying, "Oh, I suck at this," or whatever, I made, that's not truthful. Or whether you're tooting your own horn, and that's not entirely truthful.
No.
It's a, to me, like self introspection, like that is where it's at. That to me is the most fascinating and the quickest road to success and growth you can possibly have. It's not what's happening externally. It's how are you actualizing yourself within.
Yeah. And that's why it gets back to really learning how to step back and look at situations and looking at all aspects of it to make a final decision about what do I need to do, if anything, to address the issue, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think, there's value in that. Of course, there is, but a lot of times that's a analysis, and a lot of times we need to step away from the analysis and we need to
Right.
just be with it and observe it and just be curious about it.
Oh,
Um,
exactly.
and be okay with what is. And that's sometimes when the biggest answers come to us. I think that's why, they say that the right brain processes 800 times faster than the left brain, because the left brain is worried, what do I need to do differently? How do I need to, analysis, analysis, analysis. Whereas when you can settle your brain and body down, whether it's through a meditation or a heart math practice or a positive intelligence practice or whatever it is, sometimes the answer is right there. It like drops in, just the way you felt your wife hold your hand,
Right.
you know, and it just happens so much faster than all of the thinking and the planning and the spreadsheets and that we put ourselves through, trying to come up with the quote right answer.
Yeah, and I want to make it really clear. I'm not necessarily advocating just analysis, and I'm not. Analysis, though, what I think analysis can do is lead to you opening up and dealing with the rest of the issues. So analysis may be a starting point, but it's not the end all solution.
Yeah, and we need to be careful about getting stuck in it.
Yeah.
Getting
Oh, absolutely.
stuck in that place of going over and over
Because
that
that
story.
takes us right back to where we were before.
Well, right, because Einstein said, you can't solve a problem from the same level of mind that created it.
Right. Yeah. And so you can go back and look at, well, what happened, what is it that people are saying and all that, but you've got to go further than that. And so it it is emotional as well as anything else, which is probably why we haven't met Vulcans like Mr. Spock yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? It's like people are emotional beings.
Right.
So we think that we need to work things out logically and everything, but emotions are not logical. And so much of life and business is about relationships.
Right. But the one thing that we can do though is that it gets back to introspection in all forms. We do need to learn how to step back and allow ourselves to listen to that inner voice to come up with the best solution, because that's where the best solution will always be.
Yeah, so true. And so many people doubt it. So many people doubt that it's inside them. They'll come and be like, "What do you think? What do you think?" And I always say I could tell you what I think, but you'll end up working with me far longer than you need to
Yeah.
because it's not what you think. So let's do let's dive in and find out what your inner wisdom is telling you, because that's the only way you're going to rest. That's the only way you're going to know for certain that
Right.
it was the right thing to do, because you feel it in your bones.
How do people who think less of themselves or don't have a lot of self-worth, how can you help them move forward to becoming more confident? And I mean that in a positive way, as opposed to just developing an ego and I'm great and that's all there is to it. But how do you get people, or how do you help move people from a lack of self-worth to self-confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that self-worth is like one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem that we have. And I do think there are a handful of people, I think you might be one of them, that just has an inner constitution that, you know, is just a really lucky one. My son is one of them too. He has this disability, and I swear to God, I've never seen a kid, just kind of bounce back,
Mm-hmm.
like he's here to be humbled. It's not his constitution is just built that way. But I think for the vast majority of people, we're dealing with imposter syndrome. We're dealing with self-worth issues. And oftentimes people say, well, I don't have a worthiness issue because they have a great life, they have a great family, they have a great business, they like themselves, they can't really relate to feeling a worthiness issue. But when you dial down and really talk to them about, what are their fears, or what's getting in their way, or what's happening, it all comes back to this question of, am I enough? And
Yeah.
trying to prove themselves and whatnot. And so one of my taglines is, I say, it's time to stop proving your worth and start owning your worth, because your worth is there. It's always there. Your validity is always there. The only thing that happened is you turned your gaze away from it.
Mm-hmm.
You, you started looking for um, it outside of yourself, and instead of inside of yourself. And
Yeah.
so it's a harder question to answer because it's an evolution. It's not, well, I just need to say 10 affirmations every day, and then I'm going to wake up more confident the next day, right? It has to do with acknowledging and being able to catch those, if I was going to use positive intelligence language, those saboteurs that, for example, the hyperachiever saboteur that wants to tell you that you're only as worthy as your last achievement. It's being able to catch that and being able to say, wait a minute, let me once again sit you down and go back into who I am at the core of me. What is my essence? And aligning with the truth of who we are, which is, we are not our body. We are not our mind. We're much, much more than that. So there's a lot of different practices that I go through with people, but I do think that part of it is acknowledging that we're all somewhere along the same journey.
Right.
And so much of the time, it's just almost all the time, it's like one ego is talking to another ego. I'm telling you whatever I'm telling you from my ego. You're telling me what you're telling me from your ego. Very rarely are people actually truly talking from their hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And part of developing confidence, I think, is an ability to align with your authentic self, where you're not putting yourself below anybody else, you're not putting yourself above anybody else. You're just aligning with what is real for you and putting yourself out there in that way, and getting comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And when we can make decisions from that place, we feel more confident about our decisions. We never regret a decision that happened truly intuitively.
Right. Right. Well, you've worked with a lot of clients, and have had some successes. I'd love to hear maybe a success story where you really made a difference, or you helped someone make their own difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that let's see, you know, I mean, there's a lot of different ways I could go with that. Sometimes what happens when people can have a shift is everything changes. So I had a client who she almost didn't come to our call because she was just covered in shame about something that was happening in her business. And we were able to work on it not only in that introductory call, but throughout the ensuing year, where everything changed for her business. So when I used to ask her, listen, what do you want? What is it? Well, I want to be the best. Well, what does that mean? I want
Yeah,
to be the best, right? I want to be the best. Again, that goes back to this dysregulated nervous system that says,
right.
if I'm the best, then I'll feel better. Then I'll feel better, right? And after a course of working together and working with her team and really getting her to get in touch with the incredible work that her company does from a real perspective, not where she's just telling herself it or patting herself on the back, but really beginning to see what they're doing, and a close attention to her watching her inner world. She came up with the most beautiful business statement that I think I had ever heard, and couldn't even really remember the time where she said, yeah, I wanted to be the best. It wasn't about that. It's about, I want to make a difference. This is what our team is doing. This is what I'm about in the world. This is what's important to me. Um, and as a result, um, made some incredible changes, money, pouring in, and working a lot on that automatic fear that, financial ruin is on the other side of the wall, which is just a completely internal fear. And being able to release that so that you release the energetic field around you that's holding those circumstances in place. And having a tighter team, a more collaborative team, and more income than anything she was thinking of when we first began.
Mm, that's cool. And presumably she's doing better now than she used to.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And still working on herself,
There
right?
you
Like,
go. Well,
I like to work with people who understand, and this was one of the things that's very funny. I get a lot of people who tell me this, who want me just to tell them just tell me what to do, I'll do it, and then everything will be fine.
yeah,
You know,
well, yeah.
often how people come to me, just tell me what to do and I'll do it and everything will be fine. And and realizing that there is no there. There is no, this is a journey. This is a journey. And some people come and they do a small amount of work and they're good. That's where they needed to be. And then some people have larger questions, that they're really working out about themselves. They have larger things that they're reaching for, that they want to evolve to. And that's more of an ongoing process, right? Like I will never stop evolving. I will
Right,
never stop being curious.
right.
I will always be working on myself, in one way or another, and with one person or another. Um, so yeah, yeah.
That's a good thing. Well, so what is the name of your business?
Well, so my website is abbyhaverman.com.
Okay.
And people that are looking to do work with teams and whatnot, they can go to corporate.abbyhaverman.com.
And
Um,
Haverman is Haverman.
Two N's,
Two
MANN.
MANN and Abby is ABBY.
Yep, ABBY. Yep. And there's at corporate.abbyhaverman.com for companies, or let'sconnect.abbyhaverman.com for individuals. You can take a saboteur assessment that was created by Positive Intelligence and learn what your saboteurs are and have an opportunity to um, dive a little deeper and find out what's in your way and what you need to unlearn to move past it.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us and spend all this hour plus. Um, I think you've offered a lot of really great insights, and I value what you've brought to us. And as I love to say, if I'm not learning at least as much as other people, I'm not doing my job right. And I hope I've learned a lot today, and I'm going to think about it as well and probably learn more from it. But I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. And I want to thank everyone listening and watching. If you are doing this on YouTube, we really value you being here. I hope that you've enjoyed this time with Abby. We'd love to hear from you, get your thoughts. You are welcome to email me, Michael, H-I, M-I-C-H-A-E-L-H-I, at accessibe.com. Love to get your thoughts. And wherever you're listening to us, we would really appreciate a 5-star rating from you. And also for all of you listening and watching, and Abby, you as well, if you know of anyone else who you think ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, we'd love you to introduce us. We're always looking for more people and more interesting stories to tell. So with all of that, I appreciate you all being here, and Abby, you being here. Oh, and one last thing. You are also welcome to go to Michael Hingson, MichaelHingson.com/podcast, where you can see all of the episodes of Unstoppable Mindset. And again, that's another place to make comments. But Abby, I want to thank you again for being here. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for having me.